He sat me down and so began the story of a charmless man, educated the expensive way. He knows his Clara from his Beaujolais. I think he'd like to have been running cray, but then nature didn't make him that way. He went na 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 na.
I don't know, really. Let's imagine the response from Gillian Keegan and her colleagues if a Labour MP had attended a meeting with her having tested positive. They'd be baying for blood. Well, that doesn't mean you have to behave like them. This is the great tragedy of British politics at the moment. Would you believe the Daily Mail is trying to turn Boris Johnson's lies about Keir Starmer? They're trying to somehow make it Labour's fault by dredging up in David Lammy's case, completely without context, and in Angela Rayner's case, something that she has already profusely apologised for, which of course Boris Johnson hasn't, tracking up, doing a little bit of archaeology regarding Labour people and claiming that they're the ones who are really to blame. They're the ones who are really to blame for Boris Johnson being an absolute disgrace to the office of Prime Minister. If it was any other newspaper, I guess we would probably think that there'd been some form of even going back to John McDonnell, the last deputy leader of a party which has sort of dispensed with that regime rather categorically. One of the few things that everybody who voted Labour in the last election can agree on is that it is a very, very different party today from what it was when John McDonnell was deputy leader. But God bless the Daily Mail for trying to cobble together some sort of conspiracy theory, rendering David Lammy, Angela Rayner and one other. I'll tell you who it is actually, because it's so hilarious. I don't know whether this is going to land, but they really have had a rush of blood to their head in the last couple of months. The point, of course, being that what do you do if you have to defend Boris Johnson? Chris Bryant has been accused of swearing at the Speaker, which is just the same as a Prime Minister using a dead child sex offender to dishonestly malign the Leader of the Opposition. So you be careful, Chris Bryant, using a naughty word, allegedly, to the Speaker, because that is the reason why Boris Johnson had no choice but to tell a foul lie about a child sex abuser designed entirely to undermine the reputation of the Leader of the Opposition. And when Angela Rayner called the Tory High Command scum, a comment which she quickly withdrew, correctly in my view, that was exactly the reason why Boris Johnson had no choice but to try to resurrect the ghost of a despicable dead sex offender in order to dishonestly malign the reputation of the Leader of the Opposition, a man who actually received a knighthood for his services to prosecution and led the line, as Nazir Afzal, who was up in the northwest at the time, will tell you, on the pursuit of so-called grooming gangs. So it's very important we're clear about who was actually responsible for Boris Johnson trying to raise the ghost of Jimmy Savile in the hope of haunting Keir Starmer with a despicable lie. It was not Boris Johnson's fault. It was not the Daily Mail's fault. And obviously, if you're going to write an article like this, the worst thing you could do is mention all the Conservative MPs, including quite senior ones, queuing up to condemn the Prime Minister's conduct in the most unstinting of terms. You have to pretend that they don't exist. And that, in a way, leads us to what's happened to British politics in the last few years. You pretend, in order to make your point or to drive home your own rhetorical position, you pretend that things don't actually exist. You seek to redraw the rules of reality. You encourage your readers, your listeners, your viewers to ignore the evidence of their eyes and ears. It was the party's final, most terrible command. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. So just in case there is any doubt, the reason why Boris Johnson, this is an article by Andrew Pearce in the Daily Mail today, the reason it's Sir Keir's nasty party that put the poison into politics. So if you're under any illusions as to why Boris Johnson had to stoop lower than any Prime Minister in the history of Parliament, certainly in living memory, has ever stooped, a view that has been endorsed by his own MPs, by a former chief whip of the Conservative Party, by the Speaker, deliberately and despicably trying to link Keir Starmer personally to the failure to prosecute Jimmy Savile for despicable crimes where he bore no responsibility whatsoever. The real victims, I beg your pardon, the real villains of this piece. You can give Andrew a ring on Saturday to run through his reasoning on this one. The real villains of the piece are John McDonnell, Angela Rayner, Chris Bryant, who allegedly once said naughty words to the Speaker. That would be the office of Speaker that has condemned Boris Johnson's comments as well. But don't mention that, otherwise this story's not going to work at all. And David Lammy. Don't mention the context in which he likened Brexiters to Nazis, because that would make a mockery of the accusation that's been levelled against him today. I just want to be absolutely clear on that. Angela Rayner, John McDonnell, Chris Bryant, David Lammy are the reasons why Boris Johnson had to disgrace the office of Prime Minister, resurrect the ghost of a disgusting dead sex offender, and dishonestly malign, completely dishonest, let's call a spade, tell barefaced lies in the House of Commons about the Leader of the Opposition. I'm glad I've got that off my chest. And why do I care? I'll tell you why I care, why I really, really care. Because the model that was set by the lies about Brexit, or even the ignorance, it's difficult to know the difference, are now coming home to roost. You can ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears, but you can't make it go away. You can't change reality. You can try, and of course, if you have a sufficiently totalitarian regime, you can sort of impose an alternative reality upon your population. One thinks of Joseph Stalin or Pol Pot, perhaps, or more recently, more modernly, Kim Jong-un, possibly to a certain extent, Saddam Hussein. You can or Donald Trump, of course, has persuaded half the country, or at least a significant swathe of Americans, that maths doesn't matter, and that numbers don't do what they have been doing since the ancient times, and that he actually won the election, which he lost. So you can, if you are a demagogue of sufficient depravity, you can persuade people to believe things that are categorically not true. But usually the truth will eventually emerge, and Brexit being this sort of what would you call it, the platform upon which this entire government is built, is now becoming unignorable. The realities of Brexit are beginning to bite. The most passionate supporters of it are already reduced to saying, well, that's not as bad as it could have been, therefore we win. I mean, it's worse than it was before, but it's not as bad as it could have been. We win. Imagine any other context in that, where you lose a game 10-1 and you find a pundit who predicted 10-0 and start, I don't know, dancing around his house waving placards saying, ha, 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 you know nothing. Your team's just lost 10-1. Yeah, you scored one goal and you're behaving as if you've won the FA Cup. Oh, that's still a bit close to the bone, that, actually. Oh, I wonder when I'll get over that. When will that wound heal, I wonder? Probably never. If you don't know what I'm talking about, now's not the time. But it is insane, isn't it? The way in which people now are arguing. There you go. You know, you can still eat. I'm not eating grass. Therefore, it was a brilliant idea to impose economic sanctions on ourselves. I've still got a house. I've still got a job. I haven't got the biggest cost of living crisis since records began on our doorstep. But hey-ho, I'm not eating grass. So Brexit was a brilliant idea. Until, of course, the Public Accounts Committee come along and pull even that rug from under your feet. Because UK firms have been hit by increased costs, paperwork and border delays as a direct consequence of Brexit. In fact, the Public Accounts Committee, which I would remind you is made up of MPs from all parties, has essentially said that the only impact they can find is negative. The warning is also there that things could worsen, okay? Could, crucial word, things could worsen. Doesn't mean they will, and then if they don't, that's not a win, because they've already worsened. So things have got worse, and they could get even worse. If at some point subsequent to now they don't get even worse, you don't come back and say, well, they got worse, but they didn't get even worse, therefore it was a good idea to do the thing that made things worse. 11 minutes after 10, and I can't believe I still need to explain this stuff. And of course, the exact quote, the only detectable impact so far is increased costs, paperwork and border delays. And that, of course, is exclusively on trade. You find lots of other impacts if you're looking at labour shortages everywhere from lorry drivers to the NHS. And the problem, of course, is that they either lied to you or they genuinely didn't understand what it was that they were saying, which makes the appointment yesterday of Jacob Rees-Mogg as the Minister for Brexit Opportunities and something with the acronym GE, Government Efficiency, which, yeah, come on. We're all schoolboys, really, aren't we? It makes him the official minister for bogies. He is charged with looking for Brexit opportunities 6 years after telling you that voting for Brexit would be a really good idea, and slightly fewer years, 3, 4 or 5 years after telling you, well, I'll play you a couple of things that demonstrate just how wrong he is, or was, and indeed always will be, about what he sold you in 2016. We'll begin with a little interview he gave to Susanna Reid at Good Morning Britain, in which he demonstrates not only a complete ignorance of what would be rendered inevitable by leaving the single market, but also a rather arrogant belief that he's the one that understands things.
In 2017, 44% of UK exports went to the EU. 53% of all UK imports came from the EU. New trade deals with other countries will take years to sign. They will not compensate for our loss of trade with our biggest trade partner.
Well, what loss of trade?
Well, because if we put tariffs up and costs go up, and we put barriers in, and we lose just-in-time transporting, you know, we're putting up massive obstacles.
But why are we going to put up these obstacles?
Because you're suggesting we come off a cliff edge on the 29th and we don't have a deal.
I'm sorry to say this is all complete invention. There is no reason for the British to put any obstacles to imports from the European Union when we leave. None at all. No tariffs, no non-tariff barriers. Indeed, it's an opportunity to reduce tariffs and tariff barriers against the rest of the world, cutting the cost of imports from the rest of the world, which are very often more competitive than those coming from the European Union. So it's a really exciting opportunity for us. And you're assuming, if I may say so, that the government would decide to punish the UK for leaving. Why would any government do that?
I think, to be fair, he doesn't understand. I don't think he's lying. He just doesn't understand what he's talking about, which makes his promotion to Minister for Brexit Opportunities a couple of years after he got everything wrong in that interview that you just heard even more remarkable, and yet at the same time typical. So a sort of perfect reflection of where we are as a country. Here is a bloke, because every time he said if, that's now become when. So if, that's all now happened. And he said it wouldn't happen. So how on earth can he still be selling the thing that he said wouldn't cause the things that it has now caused? It's a complete mystery. And then, of course, there's Northern Ireland. Now, if you've read the Good Friday Agreement, it is impossible to come away from that document not understanding that you need regulatory alignment on both sides of the invisible Irish border. Otherwise, you will need a border in the Irish Sea. If it's part of a country that is not in the single market or the customs union. I don't know why I struggled to explain this to people. I think I underestimated how desperate they were to believe things that weren't true. So the fact that the actual words regulatory alignment don't appear in the Good Friday Agreement means that people could say, well, the Good Friday Agreement doesn't insist upon regulatory alignment. They could say that right up until the point that we put a border in the Irish Sea because there needs to be regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland. Now, I understood that pretty early on. You understood that pretty early on, unless you were swallowing the gristle and the gammon that was being served up to you by these people. Jacob Rees-Mogg probably still doesn't understand it, as he demonstrated in an interview with one of Britain's best-loved broadcasters.
Talking about the withdrawal agreement,
yes,
it is a Remainers Brexit.
What does that mean?
It means that it's shadowing membership of the European Union. It's half in, half out. That it would tie us into the common external tariff. It would tie us in via Northern Ireland to the EU's rulebook in vast swathes of activity.
And when people warned that the Good Friday Agreement would render that inevitable, why do you think they were dismissed?
Because it doesn't.
So regulatory alignment isn't in the Good Friday Agreement?
No, it isn't.
Okay. It is.
No, it isn't. It's not a matter of the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement wasn't considering those sorts of issues.
You don't think the Good Friday Agreement insists on regulatory alignment on both sides of the Irish border?
No, it doesn't.
I love the laugh. You've got to admire his chutzpah, if that's the correct word to use. And that's why I don't think he's actually lying when he says that stuff. I think he is just, spectacularly ignorant, because as we have subsequently discovered, safeguarding regulatory alignment on the island of Ireland was an absolute prerequisite of the Good Friday Agreement. But because if you did, a Google search for the actual words regulatory alignment, you could somehow, before reality bit, you could somehow claim that it wasn't a prerequisite. 10:17, I haven't even asked you a question. Well, let's do the obvious one. How has it hit your firm? 0345 60 60 973. UK firms have been hit by increased costs, paperwork and border delays. Let's get that up first. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I should warn you, now, though. That was like a cross between though and now, but it came out as no. I should warn you now, though, I've got quite a lot more to say about this, and I kept all the receipts. As you can tell, I've got a touch of the Steve Allens this morning. Michael, I won't keep you waiting long, but I feel no need whatsoever to take any calls for at least an hour. The floodgate's finally beginning to break. But here's a question you can have a go at. How can a man who has been proven to be wrong, or almost every promise he made regarding Brexit has already been broken, would you like to have a go at explaining, and I mean this most sincerely, how he ends up being Minister of State for Brexit Opportunities? 0345 60 60 973. And what I mean by that is explain it to a student of politics who possibly isn't immersed in the minutiae of Brexit. How would a man who's been proven to be wrong about frictionless trade, proven to be wrong about Northern Ireland, proven to be wrong about cheap food. We should probably play that clip as well. Proven to be wrong about the cost of living, proven to be wrong about fuel prices. All of these promises were made as a consequence. That's what he told you would happen with regard to Brexit, and he is now a Minister of State, the Minister of State for Brexit Opportunities. Do you want to have a go at explaining that from either side of the divide? And speaking of the divide, I want to try and find a way to punch a few holes in it today, so that those of us who aren't crackers, or Jacob's cream crackers, indeed, those of us who aren't crackers can start coming together a little more effectively. Because I've said it before and I'll say it again, the only people trying to keep the fight alive are the people who sold you the lies in 2016. The rest of us need them to admit the truth before we can all start putting our shoulders to the wheel of making things better. That's the bottom line. You can't fix a problem until you admit it exists. So my job for the foreseeable future is to point out the problems. And today, the problem is a Minister of State for Brexit who didn't understand and repeatedly demonstrated profound ignorance of what Brexit would mean. So how's that going to work out? But first, Michael is in Wokingham to answer the rather more obvious question of how has your firm been affected. Michael, over to you.
Yeah, I do obvious quite well.
Don't we all?
Yeah, pleasure to speak to you, James. Thanks for everything you do.
Cheers.
I work for I won't name it, a wholesale business in North London. We're lucky, we've got 50,000 SKUs of product that we ship all over the country, and we used to sell them all over Europe. This week, I've spent most of the week, after crying about Coventry City's defeat on Saturday.
Don't even go there, mate. Don't even go there. Not even on the same planet as Kidderminster Harry. It's not this. It's
no,
same neck of the woods, though.
Valid. Filling in commodity codes, getting test certificates for products which used to flow from my desk through the warehouse out on a daily, weekly and monthly basis. I was one of the idiots that bought the line. It won't affect trade. It will make it easier for us to make our own plans, etc.
It doesn't make you an idiot. Let's be clear about that. I mean, you're perfectly entitled to call yourself an idiot, but I wouldn't want anybody else listening to think that I would call them an idiot, despite the lies that Dominic Raab told on this programme about precisely that point, actually. Not this programme, this radio station. I beg your pardon.
They are simply telling. I can say it, that they are simply lying.
Yes.
Because it is nothing other than an unmitigating disaster for us to try and ship product. And the amount of time, effort and money that it's now costing us to do that is, quite frankly, staggering and obscene.
And it takes the Public Accounts Committee to render it objective. Otherwise, you would be one of my friends from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts ringing up to practice his audition piece by telling undiluted lies live on the radio. And yet, and of course, the other argument becomes, well, hang on a minute, whatever product it is that you're signing a commodity code for, I could wake up and go, well, it's still in my shop, so there can't be any problems. But the problems are the increased costs, paperwork and border delays, which the Public Accounts Committee have identified as the only detectable impact of Brexit. It's actually incredible. If this was happening to another country, depending on whether we liked it or not, or whether we'd recently beaten or lost to them at football, we'd either be crying or laughing, wouldn't we?
We would. I mean, we've literally shot ourselves in the foot. I mean,
both feet.
Over and over, and yeah, both feet, over and over and over again. And I just cannot believe this. These lies they tell that it isn't affecting us. It is, and it is affecting little old me
And still,
day.
the claim that, you know, when they're defending Boris Johnson's latest depravities, the claim that he got Brexit done is supposed to be on the debit side of the balance sheet.
I can't think that's actually something to be very proud of.
I wonder how long that's going to last. I really do. I'm interested in one thing, because I'm part of this problem. You're part of the solution. The way that everything became so vicious and so entrenched, and I naively thought you just keep having conversations with people like Rees-Mogg and explain to them that they don't understand what they're it didn't work, and lots of people wanted to believe what there he is again in the background. You got Jacob on the yeah, that's fine. No, it's good to hear from him. Congratulations on the new job, Jacob. Any thoughts on how you'll be handling your new role as Minister for Brexit Opportunities? We'll catch up with you in a minute. So you imagine it's a present that you bought, and you're not an idiot for buying it, because they told you it was a market stall. Roll up, buy this wonderful present. And I think we need to find ways of reaching the people who weren't doing it with their full chests. You know, they were just like comme ça, weighing it up a little bit. And I think that's you, right? And you just thought, oh, you're right, I'll go down that road.
Correct.
And then you've opened the box now, and it's full of, I can't say that word on the radio. It's full of tut. That's a lovely word.
Yeah,
it's full of tut.
Yes.
So who do you blame?
I'm looking for the salesman that sold it me.
Well, there you go. You just would, wouldn't you?
Yeah, listen, James. I think the issue that we've got now, we've got what we've got.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they can improve it, because it's all well and good at me selling products to this customer I'm talking about happens to be in Malta.
Yeah.
Now, I've got exactly the same problem whether I'm selling something to one of my customers in Belfast, whereas before I could sell to Belfast as quick as I could sell to Birmingham.
Yeah.
And it's simply a pain. And my customers are phoning me saying, look, Mike, what can I do? How can I help? What do we need to do? But there is not an easy solution, because every single product, whether it be a hammer, a sponge, a shampoo, has a commodity code, and we have to sit there and input them onto every invoice. And when you are not blessed with lots of staff, because that's the other issue.
Yeah.
That is something that is not a waste of time, but it's time you can't afford, because it's unquantifiable. So when the end of the month comes and I say to my boss, "These are my sales figures, Mr. Boss. Where's my salary?" And he'll say, "Well, you haven't done so much this month in wherever." Well, there's your answer. It's too hard.
And, I mean, obviously, you're massively relieved that Jacob Rees-Mogg has now been appointed Minister of State for Brexit Opportunities.
It's like me being, appointed to the PE teacher. I'm 45 years old and I'm overweight. You wouldn't have me in charge of a PE department. You just wouldn't. How these people? I mean, I wouldn't employ them in a Welch stall. There you go.
Well, there you're there. You think we're all right for whelks for the time being, aren't we? Although it's probably hard to export them, so we'll have to start eating more of them domestically in order to keep the whelk industry alive. Michael, thank you, mate. And that's the point. Don't call. I mean, you can call yourself an idiot. I don't think you're an idiot. I'm interested in the people who bought it without looking forward to how disappointed the people telling them not to buy it would be. Do you know what I mean? So all that nonsense, which I think we've largely moved on from now. I am drinking Remainer tears, or, he's still crying, and people are doing astonishingly sophisticated photoshops of me. There's one of me in some sort of straitjacket, and people claiming that he's on suicide watch and all this sort of thing. I mean, objectively tragic. Objectively tragic, because already you're sort of going, well, hang on, I haven't actually won anything. But there's a bloke over there who makes me feel a bit racist, so I'm really happy that he's unhappy. So not you. I haven't yet found a way to reach you. Well, I mean, I say I haven't found a way to reach you. You find me a lot more interesting than I find myself. But people like Michael. So you turned up at the market, right? And there's a bloke, looks the business. Nice Astrakhan collar, sheepskin coat. He's got a very tall, lanky bloke standing next to him wearing a monocle. The Del Boy and Rodney, if you like. Boris would be Del Boy, Jacob would be Rodney. And they are selling you something that looks really amazing. Roll up, come and get it. Come and get your lovely, jubbly Brexit. Come and get your lovely, jubbly Brexit. It is shiny. It will improve your life. Trade will be easier. Food will be cheaper. Fuel will be cheaper. We'll be able to strike amazing trade deals with countries on the other side of the world. Don't mention that they're on the other side of the world, Rod. And you're not an idiot, to use Michael's word. You're not a racist, like a lot of people you ended up in bed with. you just thought, yeah, all right, they seem trustworthy. I mean, they went to Eton and Oxford. They can't be stupid. They seem pretty trustworthy. Boris is funny on the telly. Jacob sort of got the air of a man who is to the manner born. I think I'll go with them and not with that idiot O'Brien on LBC. Oh, yeah, all right, I'll buy that. I'll buy that, lads. And then you weren't allowed to open it for 6 years. Or 4 years or 5 years, whatever it would be. You just weren't allowed to open it. You've got it at home, under the metaphorical Christmas tree. And you think, I can't wait to open that. When I open that, things are going to be brilliant. I can't wait to open. We should have a party when we open that. Now you've opened it, right? And remember, I'm not talking about people who revel in other people's unhappiness or people who voted for it in order to get rid of brown faces. I'm just talking about people who weighed up the odds, weren't paying that much attention, and bought it. And now you've opened it, and it is full of tut. Undiluted tut. Give me a ring, tell me how you feel. 0345 6060 973. And secondly, how you greet the news that the man who sold you the box full of tut is now the Minister of State for identifying tut opportunities. The only impact of Brexit so far, according to the Public Accounts Committee, who will be looking solely at sort of trade and matters fiscal, is increased costs, paperwork and border delays. What's going on with your business? And how do you feel about a man who's demonstrated his complete ignorance of what he was selling to you to the point of absurdity, being promoted to the man in charge of identifying opportunities? Well, I say promoted. He's got a pay rise, but a Minister of State, I don't think technically... Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. He's got a pay rise, so there's a relief. His kids need shoes, I'm told. Being promoted to the job of identifying the opportunities of the thing he sold to you without understanding what it means. And quite a few of you are asking whether or not you actually heard a bell tolling in the background while Rees-Mogg was demonstrating his complete ignorance of the Good Friday Agreement. And I don't know, so I'm tempted to play it again. So this is the man in charge of identifying Brexit opportunities, explaining why there would never be any need for a border in the Irish Sea or a border on the island of Ireland, because he understood the Good Friday Agreement while the people that wrote it didn't.
Talking about the withdrawal agreement,
yes,
it is a Remainers Brexit.
What does that mean?
It means that it's shadowing membership of the European Union. It's half in, half out. That it would tie us into the common external tariff. It would tie us in via Northern Ireland to the EU's rule book in vast swathes of activity.
And when people warned that the Good Friday Agreement would render that inevitable, why do you think they were dismissed?
Because it doesn't.
So regulatory alignment isn't in the Good Friday Agreement?
No, it isn't.
Okay.
There it is.
It is.
Ask not for whom the bell tolls.
It's not a matter of the Good Friday Agreement.
He's laughing about it. God, I tell you what, that is 40 grand a year of school fees right there. Absolutely wrong. Completely ignorant. Publicly bloviating and laughing when it's... I think you'll find the moon is made of cheese, old boy. So here we are. David's in Maidstone. David, what would you like to say?
Just an ongoing battle I'm having with HMRC at the moment, not to get any tax out of me or for any benefit to Team GB. We've got a wholesale fruit and veg and food distribution business, and we import pallets of produce from Europe on a very regular basis.
Right.
And there were 5 or 6 consignments last year that we took in. The HMRC phoned us up or emailed us wanting proof of purchase. So they wanted us to see the paid invoices, bank statements. Created a lot of work trying to find all this work. They've got all this all done. And then after Christmas, we got another call saying there was one consignment there where there was some produce from outside the EU gone into the EU coming to us, which is more complicated. So we did all the paperwork for that, sent that across to them. Then they come back to us saying there are 5 more consignments where your EROI number has been used.
Yes.
We have to have an EROI number. And these consignments were nothing to do with us. So they phoned us again on Monday to say what I needed to do. And I spoke to this guy and got very irate with him at the end. I said, look, I don't know who these consignments were for. I've got no address, any details of this. How can I go and find... He says, well, you've got to contact the export agent and get the details off him. I said, well, I've got no powers to do that, have I? If he refuses to give me those details, how can I do it? You know who he is. You go chase him. They said, well, we can't chase him because it's your EORI numbers. So a complete waste of time. So the whole thing at the moment is creating so much extra work and hassle for no benefits.
Well, that's the point. There's two things I could do in response to this. I could say, well, this could be teething troubles, and things may go more smoothly in the future, and they probably will, but they will never go as smoothly as they went before. When you taking goods from Munich to Maidstone would be the same as getting goods from Manchester to Maidstone. It would have been. I mean, this is the bit no one understood. It would appear Jacob Rees-Mogg being the patron saint of people that didn't understand it. It can never go back to being as good as it was before for people like you, and you feed the nation.
Oh, absolutely. The whole thing, as I made out, I did say to him, I'm a Remainer, strong blown Remainer, because there are no benefits to Brexit. And I've been asking people for 6 or 7 years for a benefit. No one can give me one. Because
well, then you're in for a big surprise, because Jacob's got the job of finding them.
Am I?
Yes,
no,
you
are. I'm not. I live in the real world. I live in the real world. And I said to the guy, so I've got no interest in doing this, because it's such a waste of time. How many tax officers now have we got chasing up paper trails? Not to create any finance for the exchange.
Well, I think you'll find that's called job creation, David. Stop being such a gloom monger. Stop being such a misery guts.
You pay taxes to pay for those jobs.
Yes, true.
That money was put into warming old age pensioners' houses. You know.
Yeah, I do know, and that you know
the correct use of taxes, and to do something that is a complete waste of time. I haven't got time for. I'm too busy earning a living.
Were there many people in your trade who voted the other way? And remember, today's a day where we're trying to find, we're trying to reach across the water. We're not trying to beat each other up anymore.
I mean, in the market in London, Spitalfields Market in London, there were quite a few up there, but that's very split now, because all the produce we buy now is import, export, tariff, or not tariffs, but the agent's fees inclusive now. So everything's gone up in price.
Yes.
Produce that comes in is delayed 24 hours because it takes 24 hours to get the paperwork done. Because mushrooms we're getting from Poland 3 times a week.
Right.
Used to come on a Monday, now come on a Tuesday. So they're a day older when we get the produce. So
which means they're going to go off a day earlier, which means...
So our waste factor goes up. So we've got to build that into our pricing. They're all inflationary pressures.
Yes.
My friends are growers. I mean, the labour shortages on the farms down here, all the pubs and restaurants that we serve...
Yeah.
are crying out for chefs. They can't get chefs. They can't get waiting staff. They can't get bartenders. Everybody we're doing in business with is struggling. We're struggling. I've been trying to find van drivers for 2 years now.
Really?
We're always 2 or 3 short. 2 come and 2 get poached elsewhere because they've got them for an HGV where they can earn more money.
Yeah.
So the whole labour market is volatile at the moment, which is not a good place to be. Not a good place to be.
But businessmen and women like you will find a way. Some will fall by the wayside, but we'll find a way. And if mushrooms keep appearing on our shelves, even if they're going to go a bit manky a bit earlier, people will claim that Project Fear was all nonsense. So the harder you work, the more camouflage you give to the people that have completely kebabbed your business. There's the ultimate irony of it all for you, David.
Absolutely. I know. It drives me nuts. And I'm on the way down the M20 now, and I'm going to see the queue in Dover as I go by on the way through Dover. So,
there are no queues in Dover. How dare you? There are no queues in Dover. There are merely roadside retailing opportunities, they're called now.
Yes, that's why they're putting Operation Brock along their motorway for the 3rd time, spending more money, more of my tax.
Oh, well, I laugh only with despair, but also at the fact that David understands all too well that the harder he works and the more successful he is in overcoming the obstacles that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson have put upon British business, then the more, because you now know how completely disingenuous and dishonest they are, the more they will claim that David's success in overcoming these obstacles proves that all the people who predicted the obstacles were wrong. 10:42 is the time. So, a variety of questions this morning. We haven't got stuck into this subject for a while, have we? It feels like the bad old days. So, number one, and David actually covered lots of this. How has it affected your business? 03456060973. What sort of testimony would the Public Accounts Committee, a cross-party group of MPs, what would they have been receiving from your sector? Everything or anything they've identified. The only detectable impact so far is increased costs, paperwork and border delays. So not only, of course, as David, without me even asking, understood, what does that mean to you as the business? What does it mean to us as the punters, as the customers? You know, food, less fresh food arriving, which costs more? Oh, come on. Who didn't vote for less fresh food that costs more? What do we want? Less fresh food. When do we want it? When it costs more. That should have been a slogan. Could have put that on the side of a bus, Big Dom. That would have been good, wouldn't it? But so how does it affect you as a business, and how will that then knock on to customers? Number two, your responses to the appointment of a man who has serially demonstrated his complete ignorance of what Brexit would involve, being put in charge now of identifying Brexit opportunities. I imagine there's quite a few people listening today who've finally gone, oh, all right, James. Yeah, all right, mate. Yeah, you were right. So if you're one of them, 0345 6060 973, because the evidence is there. We kept the receipts. There they are, demonstrating abject ignorance of everything from international trade right through to the border in the Irish Sea and the peace process. It's there on tape. They didn't understand what they were doing, or they were lying about it. When the best thing you can say about the people in charge of your country is that I can't quite decide whether they were deliberately lying or massively ignorant, it's probably time to give your head a wobble, collectively. And, of course, the third question, how do you feel now? Not as one of those people who locked antlers and was shouting from the 2 World Cups, 2 World Wars, 1 World Cup, all that kind of rhetoric. Take back control. Not that kind of mutton-headedness, but just the sort of 50-50, I don't know which way I'll go. I might. Do you know what? Terry voted for it, so I'm going to vote for it as well. Or they seem quite posh. Posh people, I mean, you can't end up with that sort of money unless you're very clever. So I'll follow them. I'll follow them. Also, Rupert Murdoch told me to. I generally do what Rupert Murdoch tells me to do. Voted for David Cameron. Voted for Theresa May. Yeah, all right. Oh, and I read the Daily Mail. I only buy it for the crosswords, and I ended up voting for Brexit. I only buy it for the Sudoku. I somehow ended up voting to become the only country in the world that imposes economic sanctions on itself. So don't beat yourself up, but just tell me how you feel now that you've opened the big shiny box marked Brexit and found that it's full of tut. It's not an unpleasant duty necessarily, but it's an important duty to tell the truth about Brexit. You can't rely upon pretty much any newspaper in this country. Very few broadcasters in the commercial sector. BBC's frightened of upsetting the government. So where are you going to go to find out the truth about what is going on? Thankfully, we still have select committees, almost like the final bastion of our parliamentary democracy at the moment, when you have a Prime Minister who will happily lie about the Leader of the Opposition and refuse to apologise even after being called upon to do so by his own colleagues. The select committees become arguably the only part of Parliament that can do the proper business of scrutiny. Because if the opposition do it, you can claim tribalism, you can shout footballification. If select committees do it, which consist of MPs from all parties, including, in the case of the Conservative Party, some who are not swallowers of the Boris Johnson Kool-Aid, then they are, close to the most reliable arbiters in the public space. And it is indeed the Public Accounts Committee that has concluded the only detectable impact so far of Brexit is increased costs, paperwork and border delays, to which the only patriotic response is this: how can we make things better? And then, unfortunately, the immediate political response is this: you can't make things better until you admit they are bad. And if you've still got a party that is high on its own supply and claiming that somehow getting Brexit done is an achievement, how on earth can you possibly begin to address or to improve all of the negative impacts of Brexit? That is a mystery for the ages, and we may move on to it in the next hour. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need this hour to tell me what's happened to your business, but also to tell me whether or not you've got buyer's remorse yet. And I can't stress enough, I even came up with a catchphrase for this about 5 years ago: contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. I don't have compassion for you if you're one of the people who used to ring me saying you were going to vote Brexit, or you did vote Brexit because there were too many brown faces in Tesco's, or because you were part of Farage's filthy phalanx. I have compassion for you if you simply believed that things were going to somehow get better, and you'd had enough perhaps of how things were. The more moribund and bogged down you felt, the more likely you were to fall for the fellow walking into the marketplace claiming that he had a miracle cure. The snake oil salesman through the ages has enjoyed success by preying upon not even the gullibility, by preying upon the good nature and credulity of decent people. And when I say this, it upsets some people who historically would have been on my side of this argument. They don't like me saying that there's no shame in having done it. They say, no, James, they are idiots. And they knew what was going on. And the closest I'd ever come to agreeing with them is the racism. You know, you were clearly much less repelled by the racism of Farage's filthy phalanx and the rest of them than I was, for example. Much less repelled by it. Even if you are not part of it, even if you don't agree with it, even if you don't subscribe to it,
I can't quite believe how tightly you must have had to hold your nose to march in the same direction as Farage's filthy phalanx. And yes, I am quite pleased with that, having just come up with it 2 minutes ago, but I won't overlay that. So how does that feel, that buyer's remorse? Because you'll get no shaming or attacking from me. You'll just get a little reminder that until the people that sold it to you admit that they sold you a pup, we can't get on with the business of making things better. Starmer would say making Brexit better. I'm not really on board with that yet, because that involves, of course, pretending on some level that it could ever be better than what we had before. Geraldine is in Waltham Forest. Geraldine, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
So just to give a concrete example, to send one of my products to a customer in Europe used to cost about £15 and would arrive there no problems. Now it costs between £60 and £90 because of on top of it, the customs clearance fee. And that's if everything goes well,
yes.
Not getting any return. So basically made it completely unfeasible. I cannot sell to the EU anymore. That's it. It's over because we're just losing money.
Yeah.
I have to say I'm just one of thousands and thousands of businesses. Most of my peers have stopped even when it started. Basically, Brexit, not being in the single market is unfit for 21st century internet. It's like going back 50 years, except it doesn't fit today's world. And I've lost 50% of my business. So I have to say I never bought it because already knowing sending goods, for example, to Switzerland, you always had a bit of problems.
Yes.
So I knew it was going to be multiplied by 27.
How do you account for people like Jacob Rees-Mogg apparently not understanding or not caring about what you knew would be inevitable?
I think they have to carry on the lie because they obviously had to lie to get Brexit through.
I don't think he lied. I genuinely don't think he lied. I think he was just too dozy, too thick to understand what he was talking about. He'd signed up to some sort of post-imperial Lord Snooty vision of a ladybird book vision of the UK, and everything followed on from that. Or he had to then fit the facts to his feelings, and he ended up, of course, with a bunch of facts that were absolute cobblers.
But I think some of them knew because, I mean, every single economist, without even thinking if you agreed on an ideological point of view about Brexit or not, every economist said what was going to happen. And every small business, how could a small business like mine knew what was going to happen? I just knew putting barriers doesn't fit 21st century because we've got the internet. It's not the same. We don't trade in the same way as we did 50 years ago.
That's a very good point, actually, and again, one that probably didn't get hit home hard enough. All of the people say, well, things were perfectly fine in the 1960s.
Because they didn't listen to businesses like mine. Because if they'd sat with 50 people like me, I would have given them these facts.
Well, I
knew before it happened. I knew before it happened.
Yes, and you weren't alone. David and Mason
had
massive
on the concrete. On a concrete, everyday trading level.
I share your frustration. I really do. I mean, it is. You speak to anybody
it's awful. It's criminal.
Well, it's not far off, is it? In terms of being sold under false pretenses. If this was a second-hand car, you'd be able to. No,
but this is a whole country. It's not just one car or 100.
No, I know. I'm just trying to build a figure of speech here, Geraldine. You know what I'm like. I like a nice analogy. If Brexit was a second-hand car, you've got it home. There's no engine under the bonnet, and they've just made Jacob Rees-Mogg chief mechanic.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you going to be all right? Do you want to tell us a bit about your business? Do you want a free advert? It's the least I can do in the circumstances. Or are you?
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm now opening a warehouse, even though it's overkill for the size of my business and the distances that I have to now use. A warehouse in Europe, like thousands and thousands. So you know, we're taking our business to Europe.
What country is it in?
Taking it out of the UK.
What country is the warehouse going to be in? Do you know yet?
This one's going to be Slovakia.
There you go.
Any other one?
There's a Brexit benefit. There you finally. We found there's a Brexit benefit for Slovakia.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be Jacob's new job. He'll just say the things really loudly. A new warehouse. Geraldine in Waltham Forest is opening a new warehouse because of Brexit. And then whisper, in Slovakia. And the bell will go dong, dong, dong. 10:58 is the time. I will pause Michael until the second hour of the programme, actually, because I don't want to squeeze him into the shortish amount of time available. I remind you that we are discussing the Public Accounts Committee's conclusion that the only detectable impact so far of Brexit is increased costs, paperwork and border delays. I'm interested in how it has hit your business. I'm interested, as ever, in the question of why this isn't being more widely reported. This broke too late, this story, to be in today's newspapers, but it'll be very interesting to see how the Daily Mail, which is today dedicated to explaining why John McDonnell, Angela Rayner, Chris Bryant and David Lammy are responsible for Boris Johnson's despicable lie about a dead sex offender designed to discredit the leader of the opposition. Please don't forget that it's all the fault of David Lammy, Chris Bryant, Angela Rayner and John McDonnell, even as Conservative MPs line up to condemn Boris Johnson. But I'll be interested to see how they report this. And I don't know what the future looks like. I had a little brief period in my career when I did know what the future looks like. And anyone who was listening to the programme at the time will confirm that I told you the future would look like this. That's why Geraldine was so frustrated. It was so blooming obvious. Rees Mogg there, talking about Ireland, and you just sat there going, no, you're just wrong. So I told you what the future was going to look like. Keith, you might have to get the tin if I carry on down this road. Luckily, the news is creeping up on us, so hopefully I won't get to the actual 4-word slogan, which prompts me to put 10 quid in the tin. But after this, how are you feeling about what you bought now? Starmer's people uncomfortable making too much capital out of the disgusting Jimmy Savile lie, because it puts it into the public space. And of course the extreme right wing of the British media now is trying to claim that it's Sir Keir's nasty party that's put the poison into politics, which is, I mean, objectively hilarious, but given what people have swallowed when served up by the Daily Mail over the last few years, slightly worrying. And speaking of the swill that people have swallowed after it was served up by the Daily Mail over the last few years, we're back to the now increasingly undeniable realities of Brexit. COVID provided quite a lot of camouflage to the Vote Leave cabal that took over Downing Street after Theresa May's removal. And that camouflage is now falling away pretty fast. So I can't stress enough that if you bought a second-hand car off these men, then I feel nothing but love and warmth towards you, as long as you weren't one of the people signing up to Farage's filthy phalanx or the essentially racist rhetoric of to send them back where they came from. But if you're just a bit like me, and just not paying quite as much attention to everything because you don't get paid to, and you just thought, all right, I'll have a bit of this, then you've got nothing but understanding from me. I just wonder now how you would feel if you had bought the second-hand car that these three clowns were selling.
Ridiculous report from some lobby group yesterday saying price of food will go up. It'll go down.
Our food bills would be lower. Our energy costs would be lower. Our tax bills would be lower.
Outside the EU, our food bills will be lower, our fuel bills will be cheaper, our taxes will be lower. I think people will be better off in terms of their household budget.
And, you know, they sound so plausible and so confident that I think that adds to the sympathy the rest of us should feel for people who fell for it. It didn't cross their mind that they could be wrong. The absolute full chest, as the kids say, with which it was said. Again, we'll never know whether they were lying or whether they honestly believed it. I lean increasingly towards the latter, particularly with those three quarter-wits, Rees Mogg, Hannon and Carswell. They just didn't understand. If you start from a position that Britannia waives the rules, then you can slot everything else in. No, you don't understand. We're British. Of course things will be better if we're no longer hitched to Johnny Foreigner. Not understanding anything about trade or the history of Ireland or the nature of the Good Friday Agreement or frictionless trade or the requirements of the single market or the difference between the single market and the customs union. None of that. They don't need to, because they're not talking in the realms of fact. It's not an intellectual conversation, it's an emotional one. They are simply saying things that support the article of faith that they've genuflected before. And the article of faith is a curious melange of jingoism, exceptionalism, misunderstanding of history, or deliberate, ignorance of history, which is why they're so desperate to keep history away from the people, real history away from the people. And that just fascinates me. So if you bought that off them, there'd be cheaper food, cheaper fuel, lower costs of living, and now you're looking at what's actually in the box. Simply, with mushrooms, the example that David in Maidstone gave us, mushrooms will now arrive here a day later than previously because the delay from field to shelf is longer because of the checks and because of the paperwork that's been put in place. So your mushrooms are going to be more expensive and less fresh. So let's just use one example. I quite like mushrooms because that is, of course, how the Conservative Party treats its voters, in the dark, with occasional applications of manure. So you bought that. You bought the cheaper food, cheaper fuel, lower cost of living, and the precise opposite has happened. How do you feel about that? 03456060973. And how on earth do you process the fact that one of the people you bought it off, one of the loudest voices in the market, has now been put in charge of identifying the opportunities thrown up by the thing that he told you would create the polar opposite of what it's actually created? What, I guess I'm asking you, what would it take to break the spell? What have you got to show for it now? And again, this isn't let's have a second referendum or let's rejoin the European Union, or this is simply gravity. You can't break your fall until you admit that you're falling. You can't fix a leak until you admit that you're leaking. You can't make things better until you admit that they're bad. And you can't do any of that while your only claim to fame as Prime Minister is your personal responsibility for the leak, for the fall, for the worsening of the national picture. So all of these MPs, and God knows who's doing it because they're worried about their career, or because they don't understand anything even now, or because they are just so far into the con now that they can't even fight their way out of it, claiming that, well, Boris Johnson, he got Brexit done. It's rubbish. But we can't change that. Some people may still be arguing for trying to reverse out of it or something like. I'm not. I don't think you can. It's going to be a long, slow process, which begins with the admission of truth. It begins with stopping or rejecting that invitation to ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears. And that's where I struggle to understand how anyone could still need that. So what would it take to break the spell? Has the spell broken? 9 minutes after 11 is the time. Michael is in Halesome. Michael, what would you like to say?
Yeah, morning, James.
Hello, Michael.
Where do we start, James? It's one of those things that, to be fair, I normally avoid the Brexit conversations.
We haven't had one for years. We haven't had one for months and months and months.
I know, but I still avoid them.
Fair enough.
I'm ringing. I'm kind of small fry when it comes to a trader compared to your previous callers. And I did send you. Well, I tweeted something regarding an invoice that UPS had sent my customer who's in France regarding a shipment they've received. The actual extra, the extra costs and fees absolutely astonish me.
I get this every day. You can imagine I've become a sort of receptacle for these receipts and these shocks. So, I'll send it to James. I'll let James see it, and it is actually staggering. And then you take a step back from it and think, why is this not being reported? Why am I seeing hours of broadcast and pages of newsprint dedicated to a footballer kicking a cat, which is disgusting and despicable, and he should be I don't know, deported. But the idea that is dominating the news agenda in the sort of Murdoch-driven corners of this country, while almost every business with any international trade whatsoever is being absolutely castrated.
Well, I agree with you completely, and what I despair about the most is that the normally pro-EU parties, and I'm not on about rejoining, I'm a realist, it's going to be 25, 10 years if that even crops up as a topic.
Yeah.
But if you think that it was 48% remain, 52% to leave, every single main party now has really dropped all the remainers. So we still need to be pro-EU, and we still need to highlight the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrat Party need to highlight the committee's
It's
report.
a tricky one, isn't it, though? Because, that's what I mean by the spell breaking. Because Johnson will probably at some point in PMQs, even today, say, this, you wanted to stay in the European Union. And he's working, and it will have been heavily focus grouped and polled. He's working on the principle that still goes down like red meat with his base. They still think that wanting to stay in the European Union makes you a wrong one.
I guess the Armagh, though, to be honest, was one of the thousands that that Googled what is the EU the day after the result was announced. So.
Yeah, but it's politically, they have calculated and researched it, and they concluded it is politically still powerful to use the fact that you were right about Brexit as a criticism, as an insult. And you can see why, because you can hear the emotion that people have invested in it and the difficulty that they're going to have in climbing down. We all find it hard to climb down from passionately held positions. So the more passionately it was held, the harder it is to climb down. But it's got to break, hasn't it? There's got to be a moment.
I think when it's a subject that has so many different impacts on people's lives, whether it's economical or social, to be fair, you just despair at the fact that it was even given a vote in the first. I didn't feel comfortable voting on it without knowing all the facts. And then you've got Joe Bloggs down the road who probably didn't study politics at A-level.
I didn't need to. Very few people did. Hang on. I studied politics at A-level. I should never have had a vote on this, really.
No, exactly. That's my point. Yeah. I don't think we should have had a vote. And one of my issues I've always had with you, but I'm coming around now, is the fact that we shouldn't be too hard on the people that voted.
Yeah.
And I'm getting there, James. I struggle sometimes because I think, sometimes you think, well, you're an adult, but the information wasn't there really for them to make.
No, and actually, oddly, you not listening to the Brexit phone-ins that we do has probably made it harder for you to be as compassionate and as...
No, I do listen, to be honest, but they're turned down.
for turned down, but you hear people ringing in who have had the sort of mother of all wake-up calls. We had one earlier today, didn't we? And you can't sit there going, nah, you flipping idiot, why did you do... You have to just go, well, there but for the grace of God, kind of like you just did. So I'm glad you're making that journey yourself, as in the problem is you're calling everyone ill-informed now. But the way to counter that accusation is that we were all ill-informed, we were all uninformed, none of us really understood. I didn't know it was going to be this bad, for example. So how the hell could someone who voted the other way have known it was going to be this bad? It's coming up to 11:15. We'll talk to Richard in Tiverton first after the break. Before that, one of my occasional games. Before that, a lot of people have been wondering how John Bercow, the previous Speaker of the House of Commons, would have coped with Boris Johnson's latest calumny and characteristic refusal to apology, the sort of moral bankruptcy that he's brought now to the very heart of government. Doing it actually in the Commons was a bit of a Rubicon. And wondering whether Lindsay Hoyle could have done more. The question is going to be answered before 12 o'clock today, because John Bercow will join us to answer precisely those questions. What do you think of Lindsay Hoyle's performance with regard to Boris Johnson's latest calumny? What would you have done if you were in the Speaker's chair? And what could Lindsay Hoyle, if anything, have done differently? So that'll be very interesting. Before that, one of my occasional games, 11:15 is the time. Who do you think said this? When a regime has been in power too long, when it has fatally exhausted the patience of the people, and when oblivion finally beckons, I am afraid that across the world you can rely on the leaders of that regime to act solely in the interests of self-preservation and not in the interests of the electorate. Was it A, Adolf Hitler? Was it B, Mother Teresa? Or was it C, Boris Johnson? I'll just read it once more. When a regime has been in power too long, when it has fatally exhausted the patience of the people, and when oblivion finally beckons, I am afraid that across the world you can rely on the leaders of that regime to act solely in the interest of self-preservation and not in the interest of the electorate. Was it A, Adolf Hitler? Was it B, Mother Teresa? Or was it C, Boris Johnson? And I will try to remember to tell you after this. So we break the habit of a lifetime and deliver the punchline on our hook and tease immediately after the break. Yeah, all right then. When a regime has been in power too long, when it has fatally exhausted the patience of the people, and when oblivion finally beckons, I am afraid that across the world you can rely on the leaders of that regime to act solely in the interests of self-preservation and not in the interests of the electorate. And I asked you whether you thought that was A, Adolf Hitler, B, Mother Teresa, or C, Boris Johnson. You won't be surprised to learn there are no prizes for this particular competition, but the answer rather obviously was C. That was your Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, writing in 2011. Time now for a trip down memory lane One of the reasons why I'm able to cultivate so much compassion and warmth towards people who voted in the belief that all the stuff that's happening now would not happen now. Well, all the people who believed Boris Johnson and the new Minister for Brexit Opportunities, Jacob Rees-Mogg, when they said that food would be cheaper and trade would be easier and fuel would be cheaper, all of those nonsenses. One of the reasons I understood pretty quickly how wrong they were was because of the guidance I received from people who called the programme. So the Irish question really fell into place for me when a fellow explained that he had built an extension on his house after the Good Friday Agreement had been signed, and that meant that his bathroom was in Northern Ireland while the rest of his house was in the Republic. And the idea that you could have different rules governing what food he could buy and sell and what duty would be charged on alcohol in his bathroom compared to his kitchen was palpably absurd. But still, this simple understanding eluded the likes of Rees-Mogg and Dorries. And on the more complicated issues of international trade, a caller called Kieran became something of a star of the show, earning the sobriquet Kieran the van driver, which was actually, in retrospect, unhelpful. I don't know if there's anything wrong with being a van driver, but Kieran the international courier, or indeed international man of mystery, might have been more appropriate because he had such such a complete understanding of the requirements of cross-border trade, both within and without the European Union, and the nuances of single market and customs union membership as opposed to European Union membership. So the citing of Switzerland as a model we could somehow follow, or whatever it may be. He really schooled us. And of course, he didn't just school me, he also schooled the new Minister for Brexit Opportunities.
As a business owner of a small European express courier company, will the express transport industry survive outside the customs union and single market when we become a third country?
It would be very surprising if it didn't, that there are express deliveries between Switzerland and the European Union, and Switzerland remains a third country. That I think there are a lot of scare stories around how business will operate, but you can get express deliveries from the UK to the United States, that it is perfectly possible to implement and work through customs procedures in a highly efficient and streamlined way. But there will be some changes, because we will not be in the customs union and we will not be in the single market.
Response from you, Kieran?
Right. If I can give you some hands-on experience of where I've been to every border and country in Europe. I've done a job to Switzerland before. I've exported £100,000 worth of exhibition equipment for a medical company from Cambridge. I got sent down what was called a Route 1 at Customs House in Dover. I was there for 7 hours. I then got to the Swiss border. I was there for 5 hours, and I missed the first day of the exhibition. They had to pay a 20% down payment on their temporary imports for their machines that they wanted to exhibit. They missed the first day. It cost them about £10,000, and they were deeply, deeply unhappy. This is not a frictionless border. The Swiss border is not frictionless. You have to stop. You have to go out of your van or your vehicle in your truck. You have to go up four flights of stairs to find your customs agent. You have to get your T1 or T2 forms processed, or your carnet, depending on what you're doing. Then you have to get them stamped by the French, the Swiss, then you can come in. The same applies to Customs House in Dover. There's no infrastructure there. There's no parking. At the moment, you can go there at the right time. You might be in and out in 30, 40 minutes. But when everybody has to clear their customs papers, it will be an absolute nightmare. I just want to know how you can respond to that.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, it's a question of having the right infrastructure in place and the systems that deal with this. That if you look at the imports and exports via Southampton to the rest of the world, these are hugely efficient and streamlined because that's what they're focused on. The issue with Dover is it's not primarily focused on non-EU movements at the moment. Once we're outside the EU, Dover will have to become a streamlined port. Otherwise, they'll find that they lose business to other ports.
Won't we suffer the problems we haven't that gentleman suffered in Switzerland? Why would... But Switzerland have been at it for years, and they clearly haven't done very well with it. At least what I take from what Kieran's telling us. Kieran
is telling us about an incident where he had a particularly difficult time getting through Switzerland. I appreciate that. I wasn't trying to minimise it. But the Swiss-EU border is most of the time a very efficient border with very limited delays, as is the Norway-Sweden border. Norway being...
border is much smaller than the UK border. You can go by Gothenburg into Norway, and clear customs there at a physical hard border checkpoint. You go from Hirtshals to Larvik and clear at the port in Larvik. It's tiny.
There are checks indeed between Norway and Sweden, because Norway is in the single market but not in the customs union. But the border is an efficient border that you can have, and there are many efficient borders globally. And that is what we should be trying to do. That's what government policy is, to have as seamless as possible. But there will be some changes, of course.
I'll let you make your final point, Kieran, because there are. So this will be your final observation. But make a final point to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Kieran?
There's not one single white paper that the government has yet produced on road transport, apart from permits for trailers, including caravans and private trailers over 750 kilos. Everybody would be affected. Driving licences would be affected. And they're also saying, according to the European Union white paper, it says you'll need a transport manager that must be a resident in an EU country and you must have a premises. This is going to put small to medium-sized businesses out of business overnight. We won't be able to compete, and all you're going to have is the large companies running it. I'll tell you something, one last thing from me. I transport exhibitions. I transport car parts for the just-in-time production line. I transport AOG airport on ground parts. I do band work for concerts. They cannot go by truck. They must go by van. They rely on the smooth and frictionless transport over borders from Dover to Calais, where you do not stop to clear customs. There's nowhere to stop, and it'd be an absolute disaster when it does.
All right, I have to finish there. Final rejoinder from you.
There will be a white paper. There is a bill on transport going through the House of Commons at the moment, and the issue with driving licence is one at the forefront of the Department of Transport's mind already, and they have a solution in sight. So I think the fears are being overstated.
Okay. It was about 4 years ago, May 2018. Kieran is on the line now at Heathrow, so that means my first question has to be, you haven't become Kieran the pilot, have you?
No, I'm loading a job going to Paris. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, mate, and I hope you are as well. You know I do. So there it is.
Yeah.
These fears are being overstated, were they?
I think what's happening in the UK is much worse than we could have envisaged, obviously, because when I mentioned back 4 years ago, Switzerland is obviously landlocked. We're at the mercy of ferry ports and timed crossings on the train and on the boats. So I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago, it took me 11 hours to cross over, literally from Dover Docks from the entrance to get to Calais. It took me 11 hours. And coming back, it took me 16 hours because I had to wait for my UK import numbers to put on my GVMS documents that allow me to cross. What's happening at the ports is the civilian staff, essentially, that issue your boarding passes are acting as the customs agents that Michael Gove promised would come along. So I've timed a lot of those crossings when I've been stuck in the queues. It's anywhere between, I think the best is about 5 minutes, the worst is 20 minutes. But the average is about 10 to 15 minutes per vehicle to get your boarding pass.
I had never thought of that, actually. The fact that, I mean, a road as opposed to a port is going to be a completely different proposition. When you listened back to that, were you on the line? Were you there for it? Did you listen?
Yeah, no, I did listen to it. It was a long time ago.
It was 4 years. You know, it almost beggars belief that anyone could have come away from that, unless we're talking about the usual subjects on this programme of deference and class and the ludicrous reverence that some people are groomed to feel towards people with plums in their mouth. It's astonishing that he thought did you come away thinking he knew more about your life than you did?
No. As soon as he started mentioning that you can go from the United States to the UK to deliver goods in economic and quick fashion, it's comical because a boat takes 2 to 4 weeks to come over in containers, and it's no way how your manufacturing lines work in this country. A lot of the car parts now, James, are flown in. They're not driven in anymore. They're flown in. One of my friends is actually busy collecting all this stuff out of Heathrow Airport to get it up to Mini and up to Jaguar Land Rover because they're flying it because they can't risk having it on the back of a truck. So that's a logistical challenge. It's unsustainable. It's expensive.
I was going to say there's costs and there's financial costs and environmental costs to that.
Well, of course. I mean, if you put something on the back of a van, the car manufacturer is using your van as a temporary warehouse storage facility while you're delivering it because it comes off and it comes straight on. I think COVID has masked so much of the problems that we are now going to face, which is why the Common Select Committee came out and said pre-pandemic levels of touristic traffic are going to start to come back. Now,
there's a new port. Obviously, it's been built in Calais, and the tourist traffic goes through more or less the same lanes as the freight traffic. And they're dreading it. And I've spoken to the people there when they check my passport, and they are dreading what's going to come. And it's going to be exactly the same down in Dover, especially when you've got your biometric checks and you're going to have to physically get out of your car or out of your van. There's no facilities, there's no infrastructure, there's nothing there. So what we saw in January, on the quietest month of the year, was absolute mayhem. And every time I went out, it took 8 to 12 hours just to cross over.
What would it have taken previously? Just remind us.
Before Brexit happened and you only needed a CMR, you could literally turn up for the ferry 30 minutes before it was due to sail. You go straight through, jump on, and you're across in 90 minutes, 120 minutes, so maximum 2 hours.
Good Lord.
So, and these waiting times, because I'm charging by the job.
Yes, of course.
I cannot charge my customers for waiting time for sitting for 16 hours in one direction and 11 going out. It just makes it unsustainable, and I'll just lose the work. So I did that unpaid. I didn't get paid for it. I charged the same price for the job. Some people might say I'm an idiot. You can say you're an idiot, but then when you start adding 3/4 of the cost of a job that you've quoted for in waiting time, it's just unsustainable.
Well, is it unsustainable? Because I guess the sort of Gamony contingent will be saying, well, you said you'd go out of business overnight and you're still here. And, I'm not defending it. I'm just acknowledging the existence of the boneheads. That somehow will undermine your original arguments, because you are still...
A lot of my work's gone.
Right.
A lot of my... Be honest with you, James, a lot of it's gone. I'll give you an example. I had to drive all the way empty to Paris in the first week of January, unpaid, to collect a job in Paris to go to Berlin to deliver goods for a customer that moved to Berlin because of Brexit. So I had to go to Europe to go to work. And I've invoiced it in euros. I've lost on the currency, on the exchange rate and the transaction costs. It's something that you're going to have to sit down and think, I can't do that again. So it's another one gone. And I'm not working as much now, James.
Right.
I've got friends that aren't working. I've got friends that haven't worked for 6-7 weeks. There's just no work there. The concert work, for instance, that I mentioned, especially the merchandise part of it. One of my, somebody I know that used to do the transport for the merchandise, it's gone. We're yet to see the full effects of what's going to happen because of COVID.
Clearly.
Because there were no concerts, there were no exhibitions. So once all that comes back, I think you'll start to see what's really, really going to happen.
This will sound like a facetious question, but it isn't. Well, it's 48% facetious, 52% sincere. Is there anything the new Minister of State for Brexit Opportunities could do in the short term to make your life easier immediately?
Resign?
No, seriously, though.
James,
Kieran,
all the clips that you've played...
Yeah.
Including mine, he's ignorant. I hate to say it, but he is ignorant, and he has absolutely no understanding of what happens in the real world, how companies operate. I feel sorry for the people that rang you in the first hour, that are the actual businesses. I'm only responsible for transporting the stuff. I don't get involved in customs. And the guy that's doing the commodity codes, I could only imagine he'll be pulling his hair out doing commodity codes day in and day out in a job that was so unnecessary for no benefits whatsoever.
There's no... I mean, we're out of time, but it's good to hear your voice, actually, Kieran.
And you.
Yeah, you're sounding well, which is good to know. You must have days like I have where you just think, how is this spell still not broken? How could this denial of reality still... They're boasting about getting it done, mate. That's literally all they've got. They list Boris Johnson's catalogue of catastrophe and calumny and scandal and sleaze, and then in response they say, oh yes, but he got Brexit done. And it's like saying, well yes, but he cooked a dog's dinner.
James, when you go back to Northern Ireland, you need an external border on every frontier that has different regulatory agreements, as we've found out. So the border had to go down the Irish Sea, and there's no way around it. And you go back to Frost, who negotiated that deal and then pedalled back on it and then ran off and says he hated it. It defies belief.
It really does.
Yeah, I think it's really sad, the state of politics in our country, and also the understanding of how a country actually operates.
Well, and they're doubling down on that now. One warning from a Conservative MP that the model that has been deployed this week in the defences of Boris Johnson could be the
a very grim sign of what may be undertaken by the Conservative Party in the future. They need to rely upon that absence of understanding that you described. Kieran, thank you, as ever, for steering us through what would otherwise be quite complicated territories, with explanations simple enough, I think, from Kieran. I'm sure everyone listening would agree that even Jacob Rees-Mogg could understand that now. Maybe not Nadine Dorries, but even Jacob Rees-Mogg. And John Burko will be up next to talk us through what he thinks of Lindsay Hoyle's handling of Boris Johnson's latest lie in the House of Commons, and whether or not, in fact, to be fair to Lindsay Hoyle, whether or not he could have done anything differently. And there is quite a lot of dissatisfaction with his handling of Boris Johnson's lie about Keir Starmer and Jimmy Savile. Although he has twice intervened in the House of Commons, they have been portrayed as quite toothless interventions. On the second one, I'm not so sure. I think he made it pretty clear that he wasn't one of the people that was going to float the boat of it being unlinked, or that Boris Johnson, when he specifically stated that Keir Starmer spent his time, as in his personal time, failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, that what he really meant to say was that he was in charge of an organisation that took a decision that he personally had nothing to do with. I mean, if you're swallowing that, there's very little I can do to help you, and thankfully Lindsay Hoyle made that pretty clear, but he also failed to introduce any meaningful sanction. A lot of people wondering what would have happened in the good old days, or as some people might say, the bad old days, when John Burko was sitting in the Speaker's chair, and I'm delighted to say that John Burko joins me now. John, let's start with that million-dollar question. What do you, as his predecessor and as a Speaker of very long standing, who I mean, had very little reluctance to address issues and individuals in Parliament in the most robust of terms, what do you make of your successor's handling of this specific instance of Boris Johnson's behaviour?
Well, the first point I would make, James, is that I think that Speaker Hoyle has made his displeasure clear. I think it would be very unfair to suggest for one moment otherwise. He indicated that although what was stated in the chamber on Monday of last week was not disorderly, it was inappropriate. He exhorted members of the House of Commons on the day of Prime Minister's questions to respect each other and to pay obeisance to the requirements of Erskine May in terms of moderation in the use of language and good temper and so forth. So I think that those were welcome steps, and it's very easy to criticise. I didn't particularly enjoy having backseat drivers offering their advice frequently and only occasionally when I asked for it. And I resolved when I left office that I wouldn't make a point of popping up and criticising my successor. And I don't criticise my successor. Let me make that clear. It is up to him. If you're asking me what are the powers, or some of your listeners are speculating and pondering on that point, the answer is that they're few and far between. It is open to the Speaker to sit a member, including the Prime Minister, down if he or she goes on too long or diverts wholly from the point, and I did that a number of times. It isn't open to the Speaker to insist that the Prime Minister apologise in this instance.
Okay.
What it is open to the Speaker to do, if he is so inclined, is publicly to exhort the Prime Minister, in the light of what has happened, graciously to apologise to the House. Now, that can happen in one of two ways. It would be open to the Speaker to have a private chat with the Prime Minister first, which would be extremely courteous. In other words, not to blindside him, but to say, look, this is my mindset on the matter. This is the way I'm thinking, Prime Minister. I know the temper of the times and the mood of the House and the anger of large numbers of members of the public, and I think it would be seemly and decorous if you were to apologise. The alternative would be for him, without notice, to try to force the Prime Minister's hand by saying something at the start of Prime Minister's questions without notice. That would be not rude, but it would be pretty blunt, and it might or might not work. My feeling is that the real power of the chair in these matters is not a power of enforcement or insistence, it's the power of moral suasion. And if Speaker Hoyle were inclined to say, this is a most unusual and deeply regrettable series of events over the last 9 days. First, Prime Minister, your remarks in the chamber last week, which were wholly inappropriate, gratuitous and offensive. And secondly, what appears to be actions directly flowing from your abuse, namely the attempted hustling and intimidation of the Leader of the Opposition and David Lammy. In the circumstances, you should apologise. I think that it's a no-lose situation for Speaker Hoyle. Either it works and the Prime Minister buckles, which he should, or it doesn't work, in which case I don't myself think Speaker Hoyle comes off worse. I think he's done the decent thing. He will be respected for it, and the Prime Minister will look the very small person that he has demonstrably shown himself to be. Now, one of these days, in addition to praising you for your insightful and laconic style, which makes you the envy of millions around the country, I will perhaps overcome my natural shyness and tell you what I really think.
Have you just diplomatically told us, and you do have this, I remember from when you appeared on Full Disclosure, this astonishing ability to interview yourself. That's three of the questions that I was planning to ask you.
Sorry, my apologies, Jim. I shouldn't try to do your job.
You're putting me out of a job. This is a bit like being the presenter equivalent of self-service tills in the supermarket.
I'm sorry.
No, quite the opposite. Have you just diplomatically told us what you would have done if you were still in the Speaker's chair?
That is what I would have done,
right.
But it is open to different views.
Of course.
There is nothing that isn't. No action you take or no decision to take no action can escape criticism, sometimes coruscating criticism. So, although I'm not normally accused of lacking self-confidence or conviction in my own beliefs, I'm not saying that that's the only approach. Some people listening might say, good on John, that's the right way to handle it. We welcome that. Other people might be sitting there thinking, thank goodness that ghastly man is no longer in post. We utterly reject his approach and we prefer the approach of the incumbent. But the point of coming on these programmes is to say what one does think, not what one doesn't think. And if you ask me, is that the course of action I would have taken, possibly risking great hostility from the government benches, then I would have done, because I think that the majority in the House feels the Prime Minister has behaved appallingly.
Well,
it has been absolutely disgusting. I think sensible Conservatives in the Cabinet are embarrassed, and I think sensible former ministers, very mainstream and respected figures like Julian Smith, the former government chief whip, Bob Neal, the former minister, very middle-of-the-road, sensible people, are clearly horrified by what they have witnessed over the last 9 days. The Prime Minister, frankly, really does need to up his game. I think part of the difficulty, James, with the Prime Minister, if I may say so, is that he can't help it, but he's a very, very, very poor speaker. And despite his extremely privileged education, he ums and ahs and ers his way through most sentences. And I think sometimes he just blurts out the first thing that comes into his head. Now, whether there's a brain there or some people think just a bird fluttering about in his head, I don't know. But I think what comes out is what just first occurs to him when he's not punctuating every other word with an or an or an r. And so he came out with this exceptionally stupid, but actually very sinister remark. It is fascists in this country and in the United States and elsewhere who spread this lunatic nonsense about a deep state and senior figures being either paedophiles or the protectors of paedophiles. This is abominable. This is not a proper level of political discourse. Keir Starmer is an extremely respected, serious-minded, responsible public figure and leader of the opposition. Prime Minister, try to trade in the serious stuff or get the message that you have stayed there too long for any good that you may have done. As David Davis signalled a few weeks ago, in the words of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain in the Norway debate, depart, I say, and let us have done with you. In the name of God, go.
John Bercow, many thanks indeed. Characteristically unpulled punches, as we would expect from you. Thank you very much for your time and, of course, for your kind words. As I say, that is, it is astonishing as a presenter to he answers specifically and directly the question I'm about to ask. I was about to say, why was this particular intervention by Johnson, this particular example, why was it so egregious? And it's all done and dusted. As you may have heard towards the end of last week, we spoke to Sam Bright from Byline Times and mentioned that he was one of the people who'd actually read the government's 100-page document entitled The Benefits of Brexit, which was sort of snuck out of Downing Street while there was an awful lot of other things going on, notably the arrival of the redacted Sue Gray's initial findings into all those lockdown parties or work events, as nobody honest will ever call them. And we wondered whether Sam would deign to come back and talk us through these 100 pages so that we don't have to read them ourselves. I'm delighted to tell you that Sam joins us now. Where do we begin, Sam Bright?
Oh, gosh. I mean, after reading it, James, I needed a cold shower to return myself back to reality, it has to be said, because it's honestly a word salad of, I'd say, lies, exaggerations, and actually things that we could have done in the EU anyway. So there's sort of an executive summary list of the key Brexit benefits, which, include the usual, we've ended free movement.
They never say our own free movement, do they? We've ended the free movement of foreigners, is what we've ended our own free movement. It's astonishing.
Precisely, and not mention the fact that actually ending free movement has created all sorts of labour problems. Yes. For example, HGV drivers not being able to come over and do essential things such as provide petrol to petrol stations, that sort of thing. But no, the executive summary is one thing. Just to take a couple of points in there. Returning democratic control of lawmaking is one that particularly struck me, considering that the control over our laws currently seems to be being monopolised by Boris Johnson and a few cabinet ministers. So again, we've taken back control for roughly 5 people in the country in exchange for years of political and economic turmoil, which is fantastic. Yes. Also, one in there is that we've taken
back control for 5 people who have used that control to prorogue Parliament unlawfully. I mean, actually, I suppose that could have happened while we were still in the European Union, couldn't it? This was just a question of whether or not Jacob Rees-Mogg could successfully lie to the Queen. So, sorry to interrupt you there, sir.
No, I mean, it does mention actually judicial power, that we've managed to restore judicial power, which on the one hand isn't strictly accurate because, of course, the government is still angry about the fact that the European Court of Justice has oversight over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Yeah. And it's also, so we've returned power to our judges who actually the government hates because it's attempting to limit the judicial review process because it's angry at Jolyon Morn and the good folk at the Good Law Project.
The enemies of the people. Enemies of the people, of course. You take the rhetoric of the Daily Mail. Does it? I mean, you mentioned the Northern Ireland Protocol. Do they try and sell anything that's happened in Northern Ireland as a Brexit benefit? Because frankly, it wouldn't put it past them.
That's very interesting, actually, James. I read back through it this morning for you.
Thank you.
Revisited the trauma. And Northern Ireland, I don't remember being mentioned once. Now that you bring it up, it's conveniently sidestepped in all 100 pages. So no is the short answer.
What about the happy fish?
The happy fish, exactly. Taken back control of our waters is one that's mentioned in the executive summary, which is again is just the irony is 3-dimensional because I mean for one thing, as Brexiters like to go on about now. Small boat crossings have increased massively, have doubled in 2021. So in that respect, we haven't taken back control of our waters.
Or our borders.
And our fishermen aren't able to
they're livid. Almost all of them. I mean, some of them are still in some curious delusional hinterland where they think that there was a magnificent fishy Brexit that could have been delivered. We used to speak to a poor lady in Lowestoft who ended up being in Nigel Farage's political party, and she's absolutely furious with Boris Johnson. But you rarely meet, and I know that Tom Hayward, who we've spoken to on the programme, the 8th generation oysterman, has talked about how his business has been absolutely ground to a halt to Byline Times on a couple of occasions. You struggle to find anyone in the fishing industry who's pleased with the way things are going, but we have, and I quote, taken back control of our waters, end quote.
Yes. And we have, crucially, James, these are the crucial points, so, listeners, listen in. We have and these are mentioned explicitly, blue passports.
Oh, there it is.
Yep, the imperial measurements. We have the Crown pint
They actually put this in. I thought this was a joke. So they
actually put it in.
We can put a crown on our pint glass, which, we could do before, as long as we also had other... Is there anything to stop us putting a crown on pint glasses before? While we were still in?
No.
There's nothing to stop us having blue passports, where are they made again, remind me?
Poland.
Poland, yeah. What's that trading group that Poland's in?
I think it's the European Union, isn't it?
Yeah, down with that sort of thing. So we're crowns on pint glasses and blue passports. One question remains, because I want to squeeze in a little bit of Theo Usherwood before the end of the programme. So thank you for doing that on our behalf. And obviously all the Brexiters listening will be convinced that you've missed out all the really good stuff on purpose because you're a paid agent of the Ramona conspiracy that lies at the heart of the British metropolitan liberal elite establishment. Sound right? Now that we've got... Why do we need a Minister for Brexit Opportunities if we've got 100 pages of them already, Sam?
Well, exactly. And surely, if Brexit's so great, the benefits are self-evident. You don't see the government writing up this sort of paper for every... for every policy that it has. No. So it does seem to be that they're protesting too much in the case of Brexit.
So you can't argue with those crown stamps on the pint glasses. Sam Bright from Byline Times, the investigations editor, although I don't think that gets filed under the Sherlock Holmes corners of his career. While we're on the subject, UK firms have missed out on a rebound in trade with Germany last year. New data from the Federal Statistical Office shows that imports from the UK into Germany tumbled by 8.5% in the first year since the Brexit-free deal was agreed in late December 2020. Yeah, but what about COVID? You don't know. Yeah, other countries did much better. Total goods imports into Germany surged by 17.1% during the year. So we went down by 8.5%. They went up by 17.1%. That includes a 16.8% rise in imports from Germany's fellow European Union members. 20-odd% imports from China. Theo Usherwood is here. What happened in the House of Commons?
Natalie Elphicke, the MP for Dover, has been complaining to the Prime Minister in the House of Commons about queues in her constituency of lorries trying to get onto ferries across the border into the European Union.
Dover is once again beset by miles of traffic jams along the motorways, affecting residents and local businesses alike. Not because of Brexit, but because of Brussels bureaucracy and red tape. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, meet with me to discuss how we can invest in our local roads, in the M2, in the M20 and the Dover Tap to unclog that roads once and for all, and also to get rid of the unnecessary red tape for a trading global Britain.
Not because of Brexit. That's fantastic.
So the Prime Minister replied.
She's absolutely right in what she says. As the economy rebounds, we're seeing all sorts of pressures, but we do need to make sure that we clear bottlenecks everywhere in our system, and that's what we'll do.
Gerald Jones.
Gerald Jones. Let's listen. I'll cut it off before we eat into Sheila's time, but just to send everybody away with a wry smile on their face. Can we just play the question again, please?
Dover is once again beset by miles of traffic jams along the motorways, affecting residents and local businesses
Only someone
alike.
had warned about this.
Not because of Brexit.
Can we clip that forever? Not because of Brexit. I'll just play it out every time we get something that's happening to our beloved country because of Brexit. We could have Natalie Elphicke's voice ringing in the back of the studio like the bell that tolled for Jacob Rees-Mogg earlier when we reminded you of some of his comments from a couple of years ago. Not because of Brexit. What planet do these people inhabit? We may never know.
When you put it all together, there's the model of a Charmless